Welcome, students, to a short presentation that highlights just some of the parts of Chapter 5, which is called Carbohydrates, Sugars, Starches, and Fiber. Now, could you imagine a world without sugar as we know it? Just take a look at this screen. Cakes, sodas, ketchup, bread, sauces, jams and jellies, ice cream, candy, and the list goes on and on. And all the pictures here on the screen are, when you see these, a lot of times you would think sugar, the word sugar, which is often why carbohydrates are villainized in our culture. However, carbohydrates are so much more than just the sweet, delicious things that I put on this slide. Carbohydrates are naturally found in fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and beans, all of which are foods that can be part of a healthy, nutritious diet. Now, in the following slides, we'll take a closer look at some interesting information related to carbohydrates that I've picked out from Chapter 5. Now, where you are in your education right now, and from what I understand many of your majors are, you probably are quite familiar with carbohydrates and their structures, but let's do a quick review. Carbs are molecules that are made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, which is why you may see them called by the acronym CHO or CHO. And these are arranged to form one or more sugar units, like glucose, as seen on this slide, which is just one sugar unit, and sucrose, which is made of two sugar units, glucose and fructose, joined with a glycosidic bond. Carbohydrates are found in many plant foods such as fruits, grains, barley and brown rice, and also in milk and milk products like yogurt. Carbohydrates are a key source of fuel for our bodies, especially our muscles, red blood cells, and brain, providing 4 kilocalories of energy per gram. Now, one of the other animations I provided in Blackboard breaks carbohydrates down and discusses the differences between simple and complex carbohydrates. So be sure to take a look at that particular animation. Something I wanted to highlight in this presentation is some terminology you may see when you're talking about or listening to someone discuss sweeteners. And this slide focuses on nutritive sweeteners. The next slide will focus on alternative or non-nutritive sweeteners. So things like honey, fruit, and maple syrup are examples of nutritive sweeteners. It makes sense that these would provide calories. These types of sugars are either consumed by themselves, such as fruit, like bananas or apples, or added to foods to sweeten them. Food manufacturers add sugars to many foods to either increase the sweetness or as a preservative because they bind water in foods, lowering the water activity. Now, since microorganisms need available water for growth, when you reduce the available water, keeps bacteria and molds from increasing in number, thereby preserving the food. If you check your food labels while shopping and you see that the first ingredient or one of the first ingredients is sugar, then the sugar content is likely quite high. Table 5.2 in our textbook gives a fairly comprehensive list of names that you may see sugar called in foods. And if you think about it, some of these words are not easily identifiable as sugar unless you're educated in these names. And you may not even recognize that the food product contains sugar at all. I would also like you to view the video on high fructose corn syrup and the supplemental materials because that has been a hot topic for a number of years. Conversely, alternative sweeteners are those that do not provide any energy. So if they provide nearly zero or 0 calories, these types of sweeteners are often favored by those trying to reduce their intake of regular table sugar. Sugar alcohols like xylitol, mannitol, sorbitol, and erythritol are also alternative sweeteners found in things like chewing gums, sugar-free breath mints, and candies, and even some beverages. Added sugars must be on the current nutrition label. However, sugar alcohols aren't considered added sugar since they don't actually add calories. The other group of alternative sweeteners are those that you see in your pink, blue, green, and yellow packets um, at almost every restaurant you go to. These alternative sweeteners are also non nutritive. They're the ones such as stevia, Splenda, Equal, or Sweet and Low, which are very, very sweet in comparison to the same amount of regular sugar. They are derived from plants, herbs, or even sugar itself. Table 5.4 in our textbook shows the comparison of the sweetness of several non nutritive sweeteners compared to regular table sugar. And I've provided additional information about the stevia making process or the stevia extract making process in the Chapter 5 supplemental materials on our course Blackboard site. So check that out. Now, shifting gears away from carbohydrates that actually sweeten foods, I wanted to touch on complex carbohydrates, especially whole grains versus refined grains. Whole grains are those that contain the entire kernel, including the endosperm, bran, and germ. And some examples are things that you probably eat or have eaten in the past: quinoa, brown rice, and oats. Now, according to the 2020-2025 Dietary Guidelines for Americans, about half of our daily grain intake should be from whole grains. And unfortunately, most of us don't take in the recommendation of 3 or more servings of whole grains per day. This is for several reasons, and let's talk about that. Usually, it's just taste and texture preference. Because, for instance, whole grain bread, which contains ground bran of the wheat grain, contributes something called ferulic acid. This gives it a different taste than white bread, which doesn't contain the acid. Many people don't like the taste of the wheat bread because of this, and often sugars are added to make the bread taste better. The cost of whole grain bread is usually a little bit higher than white bread, which often causes white bread to win out over the purchase of wheat. So why is whole grain more expensive? And you would think it wouldn't be as expensive because you're not refining it as much. But generally speaking, the ingredients in white bread can be bought cheaply in bulk, like white flour and sugar. And since white flour doesn't spoil as quickly, it can be stored in huge amounts and not purchased as often by companies who produce the bread. If the whole grain bread is organic, that can add even more cost. This is due to stricter harvest and manufacturing methods. The marketing of whole grain food products can also be a bit deceptive, especially when you see terms like stone ground wheat or cracked wheat or made with wheat flour. Now, these terms really don't mean a thing other than that the bread may be made with white flour and have a few whole seeds sprinkled on the top of the bread. The Whole Grains Council has tried to simplify the act of identifying whole grains by providing a stamp that verifies a product as being made with whole grains. So let's take a look at that now. So in 2003, a group was formed to help consumers identify whole grain foods more easily. The Whole Grains Council is a nonprofit consumer advisory group whose mission it is to increase consumption of whole grains for better health. The council has developed 3 different stamps that may be used by food manufacturers for their packaging to indicate how much of a product contains whole grains. Now, the issue is this is completely voluntary, and in order to obtain the right to use the stamp, you have to pay. So the manufacturer must be a member of the Whole Grains Council. Then their product's whole grain content must be verified by the council, again, costing money. It then becomes a legal binding contract between the council and the food company that the company will manufacture food products with a designated amount of whole grains in them. Even with the stamp on a food product, you have to carefully check the ingredients label, as many whole grain products still contain lots of added sugars, fats, and sodium. But here are some of the stamp examples on here. So we've touched on whole grains. So what is a refined grain? The term refined grain is used to describe grains that are not whole because they're missing one or more of their three main parts, which are the bran, the germ, or the endosperm. The bran is, you can see in this picture here, the outer layer of the grain kernel, and it contains lots of nutrients, antioxidants, B vitamins, and fiber. The germ, which is the plant embryo, contains B vitamins, protein, minerals, and healthy fats. So when these are stripped away during refinement, many nutrients are unfortunately lost. Now, something interesting is when milling technology developed in the late 1800s to remove the bran and germ from grains, interestingly enough, nutrition problems quickly arose, such as pellagra and beriberi. We learned earlier that pellagra is caused by a deficiency of niacin, beriberi is a deficiency of thiamine, or also called vitamin B1. Both of these vitamins can be found in whole grain foods, and it wasn't until the late 1930s and 40s that the U.S. began to recommend grain products be enriched or replenished with the vitamins and minerals lost during refinement. Even though enrichment does increase the nutritional value of many foods, often the main source of refined enriched carbohydrates are white flour, white bread, white rice, pasta, breakfast cereals, with lots of added sugars, fats, and sodium. Now, when it comes to carbohydrates, what does the typical American consume per day? On average, Americans consume about 47% of their kilocalories, or almost half, from carbohydrates. The Dietary Guidelines for Americans recommends that 45 to 65% of your total calories come from carbs. So, for example, if you eat about 2,000 calories per day, between 900 and 1,300 calories should be derived from carbs, preferably from ones that are mostly unrefined. This is about 225 to 325 grams of carbohydrate per day. And although carbs get a bad rap, they are vital to your health, especially if you focus on carbs from fiber rich sources like fruits and vegetables, whole grains, low fat dairy products, and legumes. Added sugars should be minimized or completely avoided since really there's no health advantage associated with their consumption. Now, in 2017, Americans consumed about 22 teaspoons of added sugars per day. Remember, these are not the sugars found naturally in foods like bananas or sweet potatoes, but the ones added for flavor, texture, or preservation purposes. The dietary guidelines recommend that added sugars be kept at fewer than 10% of your total calories per day. Major sources of added sugars in the American diet are regular sodas or soft drinks and energy drinks. For instance, one of the popular energy drinks that I saw on the market right now contains 54 grams of sugar in one 16-ounce can. That's more than 13 teaspoons. It's almost hard to believe, especially if you can imagine 13 teaspoons measured out. It's quite shocking, really. So the bottom line is you really need to be checking your food labels. The FDA has recently attempted to make this easier by amending the Nutrition Facts Panel to show added sugars. Scientific data shows that it's difficult to meet nutrient needs while staying within calorie limits if you consume more than 10% of total daily calories from added sugars. The old label on the left in the graphic shown on the screen did not show added sugars, and the new one does. Showing this helps us determine what percentage of our sugars are added rather than lumping them all together in just a total sugar or carbohydrate category. So you can see on the right the label that we currently use. This particular product says includes 10 grams of added sugars. So you can make this determination when you are grocery shopping. Now, this concludes this presentation. But remember, I encourage you to watch the other animations presented on the Blackboard site in this module, as these explain other aspects of carbohydrates. I, in fact, I provide a lot of information on carbs, especially in the supplemental information area. You don't have to view these, but I do encourage them. I want you to pay particularly close attention to the information on maintaining normal blood glucose levels, diabetes, including the various types, and other syndromes and conditions caused by too much, too little, or sensitivity to carbohydrates. And this is all in your textbook. Provides a really, really good explanation of all of these conditions. If you have questions about Chapter 5 or its associated materials, contact me. I'll be happy to discuss them with you at any time. Or if you want to discuss any of the conditions associated with, uh, with carbohydrates that they can cause. I hope you have a great week.